Good morning. Let me tell you, it is great, absolutely, to be here. I have been looking forward to this for a long, long time. It is absolutely my honor to be able to be here with you and to see some of our good friends that we've known for a long, long time. It has been like a trip down memory lane. I was here over 40 years ago, preacher at Mill Springs. I'm thankful. A little bitty church up there took a gamble on me to hire me as the preacher. And so many things. The addition, we added on the addition. We had baptisms, mostly in the lake, but we had baptisms here in the church. Just really good. And the lifelong friends that we have developed just been absolutely precious. But when I left Mill Springs, I can remember the last Sunday we had to tender our resignation. We were leaving. In my ministry is one of the hardest things I ever did. And I prayed to God. I said, God, if it's all the same to you, I just as soon never leave another church again, because that was so hard to leave you folks. I don't know if you know that or not, but it was really hard for us to leave. And so God has honored that. And so I've stayed more than 40 years. And when I went there, I prayed, God, I also don't really know what I'm doing, so please help me not mess it up too bad. But God honored that, and we have grown tremendously. We went from one service to 2 services to 3 services. We eventually relocated, and we built a $10 million building. If you want to see your preacher sweat his faith, man, that'll happen. But God honored that. We started over 100, and now we're over 1,000, 1,100 people. Just absolutely incredible. We've also built 3 churches in Mexico. We built a medical clinic in Africa. We've run mission trips, all kinds of just super, super wonderful things. And I learned through that process that God honors faith and he honors sacrifice. And so kudos to you for this church and what you have done in the last several years. When I first came and I drove down that road, you know what the first thing I noticed? Where's John Raccoon Smith's cabin? That was here. And then they said eventually it was up on the hill. So I did look at it this morning. But God honors that faith. I'm so thankful. Joe's been here for 13 years. I believe in long-term ministries, and God blesses and works through long-term ministries. So really glad. Also, I am retiring in 5 weeks. I have 2 sermons left to preach on Father's Day and then July 7th. But I'm retiring. I think it's fitting that I'm here, because this is where I started my ministry over 40-some years ago. And then I get to almost conclude my ministry by preaching here too. So really kind of neat. But one of the reasons I'm retiring is because you can see I brought a little apparatus with me today. It provides oxygen. I call it's a MERS. It's a man purse. And I tell you, I got a whole new appreciation for you women that carry purses all the time. Goodness sakes. I don't even like to wear glasses. And here I have to carry this thing all the time. But it has been a roller coaster ride. I've been in and out of the emergency rooms and ambulances and week stays at the hospital. And now I'm doing testing at Cleveland Clinic, just all kinds of things. I've been diagnosed with idiopathic pulmonary fibrosis. And it's just almost everything's happened. I passed out one time. Pretty much everybody thought I was dead. My wife was doing mouth-to-mouth resuscitation. My son was beating on my chest, and I didn't come to. I wasn't responsive. I wasn't breathing. My eyes were open and glassed over, and it wasn't until they put this thing in my nose upside down that I woke up and said, "What? You put that upside down?" I was awake instantly. And then just a few weeks ago, I have to take a shower with oxygen because it depletes my oxygen. I don't have enough. And I didn't know it, don't remember it, but when I I had gone to Indiana to visit my mom. And when I came out of the shower and got dressed, I came out, I was coughing really bad. I wasn't breathing very good. And I looked at this machine, I said, "What's that?" I had lost my memory. They eventually took me to the emergency room. I was there for 5 hours, and there was a male nurse that was asking me questions come in. I couldn't name my kids, couldn't name my grandkids, didn't know that my son had 3 grandchildren. I couldn't remember. And then he said, "Do you remember who the President of the United States is?" I said, "No." And then I said, "But I can see him." And then I said, "But I can't remember his name. But I know he's a Democrat and I don't like him." And that's when I couldn't even remember anything. It's like, but then my memory all came back. And so I'm really glad. So you might say that I lost my mind. But And so I just didn't think it's fair. So I need to retire. And so I'm going to retire in 5 weeks and looking forward to that. The message, I don't know if you usually fill out the blank, but I've got blanks in your outline that you can follow along. I just find that is a great way for people to kind of engage and then to be able to remember it later. So let me start off with a true story. It was June 5th, 1944. Some of the older folks will remember what that date is. But Nazi Germany had taken over Europe. Poland had fallen, France had been overrun, and Britain was hanging in the balance, and the whole world was on the thread of disaster. And the next 24 hours would determine the fate of Britain and the rest of the world. Approximately 9:30 that night, an airborne division, 101st Airborne Division, they dropped 13,000 paratroopers into France. They land at 3 a.m. in the morning, and they land in this little place called Angoville. Well, among them were paramedics. And so 2 of the paramedics, they were separated from all their supplies, like many of them were. But what they did is they found an old church, and this church was 900 years old. But they thought that would be a good place to set up a place to be able to treat the people that were wounded. They found an old farm cart, and so they went out and they would pick up wounded soldiers, and they would cart them to the church to be able to take care of them. They put a red flag on the outside of that church so that people knew that was associated with the medical field. And so they began to load injured soldiers one at a time into that cart and wheel them to that church. At one point, a German soldier burst into that room, pointing his machine gun at the medics. But then when he saw that they were treating injured soldiers, he crosses himself and leaves. Later, 3 German officers come in. They see the men, and they were treating everyone regardless of the uniform that they were wearing. Both sides they were treating. And then at one point, a bomb crashed through the ceiling, cracked the stone floor, and moments ticked by, and nothing happened. They treated more than 80 soldiers that night, including several Germans as well as a young local girl, and they received a Silver Star and the Purple Hearts. But if you go to Angoville today, you'll find something that's kind of unique. After the war, the town wanted to try to put things back the way it was. So they went into the church and they began to clean it. But when they saw the blood all over the pews, they decided that they wouldn't fix those. They didn't replace them. They didn't sand them down. They didn't put cushions over the pews. They preserved them. They wanted to make absolutely clear to all future generations that that church built in the 1100s was to be a place of hope and a place to fix the broken and a place to heal those who were wounded. And you know, when I heard that story, I thought that's a picture of what the church ought to be. The church ought to be a place where the wounded can go and the broken can be fixed and people can be accepted no matter what the circumstances. And it can be messy sometimes, it can be gross sometimes, but that's what the church is. The theme of the men's retreat was lead like Jesus. So if you want to lead like Jesus, I think you have to ask yourself some questions. Here's the first one. God, what do you want to do through me? Because sometimes I think that we think of leadership as these positions, and it's not a position at all, at least in Christ and in the church. The church is a hospital for sinners. It is not a museum for saints, and that's what sometimes churches in America have turned into. Look at Matthew chapter 9. Jesus went through all the towns and villages, teaching in their synagogues, proclaiming the good news of the kingdom and healing every disease and sickness. When he saw the crowds, he had compassion on them because they were harassed and helpless like sheep without a shepherd. Then he said to his disciples, the harvest is plentiful, but the workers are few. Ask the Lord of the harvest, therefore, to send out workers into his field. The harvest is plentiful. Everywhere you look, there's people that are broken. Everywhere you look, there's people that are hurting. Everywhere that you look. And that is true in Monticello, Kentucky. It is true at Mill Springs. It is true in Wayne County. It is true in all of Kentucky and really all around the world. So here's the challenge. If you want to lead like Jesus, then here's the next question, the plea that you have for God. God, let me see the harvest field where I am. Look around. Where did God place you? Is it work? Is it school? Is it this county? Is it your neighborhood? Is it your family? Where is it, God, that you've placed me that I can do the most good? Bloom where you're planted. The next challenge, God, if you want to lead like Jesus, God, let me see people the way you see people. I want to challenge you to look at people. How would Jesus see those people? Let me see them the way that you see those people. You know, when they would bring people to Jesus, he wasn't annoyed. They brought the Canaanite woman, the woman that was caught in adultery. They brought the 5,000 to him to feed. They brought the children. He wasn't annoyed. He didn't turn them away. He helped them. The disciples all wanted to turn him away, but not Jesus. So some people, have you ever noticed some people are just annoying? They're just annoying. You guys ever have any of that? Probably not here in Wayne County. Look at this. A coworker said to me, could you be any more annoying? And so the next day I wore tap shoes to work. Yeah. God, if you want to work through me, what do I need to do and where do I need to do it? 70% of preachers in the Christian church, 70% of them quit within the first 10 years. And of the 43% of those that were left, they responded by, they have seriously thought about quitting the ministry. So I'm thankful that Joe's been here for 13 years. I'm thankful that I was able to be there for 40-some years there. They mentioned things like financial stress and time pressures, an annoying sense of failure, leadership, dysfunction, inexplicable loneliness, constant criticism. One pastor, he was really struggling. He said, you know, I'd really like the ministry if it wasn't for people. Well, so you know what will keep you in the ministry, by the way? I think there's two things. You love God and you love people. And there will be times that you go through that you're struggling with one or the other. But if you really love God, when people are putting you down, you're going to stay in there. And there's going to be times that your faith is going to struggle. But if you love people, that'll keep you there in the ministry. So love God and love people. It says that when Jesus saw people, he had this deep-seated compassion that he had for people. So it's not like you're driving down the road and you see a homeless man on the corner and think, oh, God, take care of that man. And then by the time you turn the corner, you forget all about him. The word is more like a parent that is there in the hospital room looking over their child, and it's that kind of compassion that they'll be with that child, and they'll be that child, and they'll take care of that child and do whatever they can. And so not to be annoyed by the homeless or the sick or the people that need help, but to care for them. And so I pray that if you can't stand your coworkers, or you don't really care about your classmates, or you're annoyed by your neighbors or your family, then how would Jesus see those people? Look at Matthew chapter 9. Verse 36 says, when he saw the crowds, he had compassion on them because they were harassed and helpless like sheep without a shepherd. So if you want to lead like Jesus, then God, let me be concerned for people in their plight. What is it and how can we help? That word is translated troubled, harassed, people that are confused. That would include homeless. That would include the poor, the drug addict, the single mother, people on food stamps, students that dress differently than you do, people that don't have any real friends, the geek that has a pocket pencil protector, in their shirt. Jesus came to seek and save that which lost. It's not the color of their skin. It's the color of their blood. We're all made in the image of God. For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son. God loved the world, and we all bleed red. Stories told of Methodist Church. They tried to get this guy to come to church, and he just wouldn't come to church and wouldn't come to church. And finally, they said, well, why won't you come to church? He says, well, I don't have good clothes enough to go to church. And so they went out and they bought him a suit and a tie and a shirt and shoes. And the following Sunday, he still didn't show up. And they said, well, why didn't you show up? Well, he said, I put the suit and the tie on, the shoes. And he said, I look so good, I thought I ought to go to the Presbyterian church. Most of us here look like we've got it all together. And you don't look like you're confused or troubled. But sometimes when we're in a group, sometimes we just think somebody else ought to do some of that stuff, but not us. There is something that they learned in psychology, probably started back in the 60s, and it's called the bystander effect. Let me give you some examples here. The first one is Kitty Genovese, however you pronounce her name. She was It's probably the most famous. She was from Queens, New York. She was walking home after work when she was attacked by a man, and she screamed for help. Several neighbors looked out their window, and they saw what was going on, but nobody came for help. Reportedly, one man did yell out the window, scared him away, and he left for about 10 minutes, and he came back and continued over the next 30 minutes to abuse her, and then eventually stole her cash and fled. For 30 minutes, 37 people witnessed that crime. Nobody went to help. Nobody called the police. Nobody did anything. The second case, Richmond High School case, 15-year-old girl brutally raped and savagely beaten by 10 men on October the 24th. That event took place over 2.5 hours during a homecoming dance. People standing around, instead of helping, instead of calling the police, they took out their phones and started taking pictures and videos. They said at one time the assistant principal went by and he peeked through the window and he saw that there were 10 men there, and then none of them had identification that they belonged there in that. But he too didn't call the police. He didn't call security. He didn't help at all. One guy said, I thought she was dead for a minute, then she started moving. He said, I could have done something, but I don't feel like I have any responsibility for what happened. Here's the third case. Kevin Carter's photo. You may remember this one. He was a journalist, and he had gone to sub-Saharan Africa, and a female toddler, that little girl in the picture, was crawling across the road to a food center where she could get food and water because she was starving to death. And this photojournalist saw that vulture. He waited there 10 minutes for that vulture to spread its wings because he thought that would be a better picture. But the vulture didn't spread its wings. So he took that picture, he shooed the vulture away, and then he left. The vulture came back. You know, after he left, he went home. Do you realize he won a Pulitzer Prize for that photograph? And then the words started coming in. Questions. What about the girl? What about the girl? What about that little baby? He didn't know because he left. And when he won the Pulitzer Prize, you know what he did? He took his own life because he couldn't stand the fact that he didn't do anything. Here's the next case. 16-year-old high school student, Kasheen Morris. He went to visit a mall. He was attacked by a group of teenagers. He repeatedly was stabbed in the chest. He died in the hospital that night. Several videos were found of the whole incident on the internet, but nobody bothered to intervene. The next one, in the rise of the mobile phones and the pictures and the videos, it's just gotten worse and worse and worse. And people, they videotape that, they put it on the internet, but they don't do anything about that. And it's absolutely a tragedy when that happens. Now, the more and more it's recognized, we shake our heads in disgust. We think, how in the world could anybody do that? But I mean, somebody ought to do something. But then they say it's easy to look at other people and say, well, why don't you do something? And yet they don't do anything. We talked about Friday night a little bit, people waiting for a sign from God. And God, just give me a sign. Give me a sign. You know, it is not a suggestion. It is a command. And if we're not helping people, then we need to repent because it's a command of God. And I know it's not that people are evil. It's not that they're bad. It's just that they're removed from that. There's things like, well, maybe somebody else in the medical profession, they could help, but I'm not. Maybe I'll make things worse. Other people say, well, maybe I'll hurt the person even further. Some people think, well, what if I get sued? It's not that they're evil and wicked, but it's what's called the bystander effect. And what happens is, the larger the group of people, the less likely it is for somebody to help. And sometimes that's the danger in the church. It's because there's a group of people here, and so we think, well, somebody else could do that. And so there's this assumption, somebody else will do something. Well, the problem is, a lot of people are assuming the same thing, that somebody else will do that. Somebody else will go on a mission trip. Somebody else will teach Sunday school class. Somebody else will teach the message, give the communion meditation. Somebody else will work in the nursery. Somebody else will. And so we begin to think that way, and then we avoid our responsibility of doing what we ought to do. I recognize it. It's not that I don't care. We do care, but we just don't do anything. Sometimes it's rationalization. We think, well, there's nothing really that I could do. I mean, well, what can I do? I care, but I'm not really that qualified. I'm not gifted enough. I'm too young. I'm too old. I don't have the resources. I don't have the connections. There's always some reason that it doesn't happen. And we have a tendency to think, well, I don't know. I mean, there's nothing I can do. I'm pretty busy. Sometimes it's fear. People are just afraid of what might happen if they get involved. The challenge at the end of Matthew chapter 9, he begins with calling Matthew the tax collector. And then look at verse 9. He, which is Jesus, saw a man named Matthew sitting in the tax collector's booth, and he said, "Follow me," he told him. And Matthew got up and followed him. Come on mission with me. So the next challenge is, if you want to lead like people, or lead like Jesus, then God, let me care for people. Let me care about them, and how can I help them? We can pray. Let me see people the way you see. We can send. Our church is, I think one of the highlights of my life has been mission trips. I've been in I think, every continent except the Antarctica. It's cold. They have nothing but penguins down there. I don't go there. But we've built churches and mission groups, and we've fed villages, and we've done all kinds of things. It's just been a joy. And every time I go, people say, well, I want to go. And then they back out because of fear. And when I come back, you know what they say? Because we all come back healthy and safe and everything's good. When I come back, they say, I know I should have gone. But they didn't because of fear. Don't let fear stop you. But we can send somebody else. If you can't go, you can take your Sunday school class and you can support somebody else that can go. There's all kinds of things that you can do. Romans chapter 10 says, how can they call on the one whom they have not believed? And how can they believe in the one on whom they have not heard? And how can they hear without someone preaching to them? And how can anyone preach unless they are sent? So sending is a part of going. And that's what we ought to be doing as a church. So you can go. Or you can send. Look at this. A church shouldn't be known for its seating capacity. It should be known for its sending and serving capacity. I would hope that First Christian Church in Monticello has that reputation. That we're a church that cares about people. That we're a church that sends missions out and wins people to the gospel. The gauge of success is not just numbers. You can be a mile wide, but only an inch deep. You want to make sure there's discipleship going on and people are serving the Lord. You have been saved to serve. That's why God has called you. And you are in a unique position to be able to help people the way other people maybe cannot help them. It is not God's will for your greatest passion to be a hobby. It is not God's will for your greatest passion to make as much money as you can and retire. It is not God's will that the highlight of your week ought to be the Amazon package on your front step. It is not God's will that you just retire as a millionaire. Take it easy for 20, 30 years. It's God's will that you pray. It's God's will that you care. It's God's will that you send or go. God is calling you. And he calls your whole life to that. And so the question is, God, what do you want to do through me? My life verse has become Ephesians chapter 3, verses 20 and 21. Now to him who is able to do exceedingly abundantly more than we'd ask or ever think. That's true in my life. I never would have imagined what I've had a chance to do and what God has done through me. To him be the glory in the church in Christ Jesus forever and ever. Amen. The church is a hospital for sinners. It's not a museum for saints. Thank you for allowing me to be here today. God bless you.
We want to give you an opportunity to pray with somebody if you'd like to. We're going to sing a couple songs together as we always do. And if you need to pray with somebody, you have questions about what this looks like for you and how you can actually live this out and live as a servant in our community, in your context, we'd love to help you. So I'm going to be hanging out up here. Robin's up here. We'll be glad to talk with you, pray with you, whatever you need to do.